Yo, guys, welcome to the Blue Podcast with me, Mackers and Tom. Today, no Ben, unfortunately, he's working. This is the Gradient Show. How you doing, Tom?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. How about you?
I'm pretty good. Good start to the morning, watching Moon Knight, of course.
Always is, yeah. Best part of Wednesday since they moved Loki from Friday to Wednesday, didn't they? So yeah, it's always good.
Very good. Well, if you can't tell from the title, probably as well. Spoiler review of Moon Knight episode 2. Obviously, we're going to try and do every episode on the Gradient Show for you guys to enjoy. But before we get into that, we are an ambassador for a new app called LinkMe. It's a new app that allows you to juggle social media accounts easier than ever. Make sure to download the app and make an account with our link down below and check out our merch. That would be greatly appreciated. Well, a thought-provoking episode for sure, Tom. Certainly makes you think one thing and then another thing happens. Again, before we actually get into it, spoilers, so that we don't spoil it for anyone. But now that's out of the way, pretty good episode.
Mate, fantastic episode. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyable. I mean, I didn't realize they could top the first one in terms of it being sort of action-packed, like plot-driven. But yeah, it was really thoroughly enjoyable. And like you say, they really are not leaving anything to like sort of being straightforward. Like everything changes. You think one thing and all of a sudden it's changed, and they're definitely not sticking to the comics at all. I think we mentioned that last week with Arthur Harrow's character being just completely different to his comic book counterpart. And yeah, today I think we'll talk about it later on, but we saw with the Mr. Knight costume, I think, yeah, it's definitely different to the comics in that he's not a different personality. He is literally, well, from what we can gather, he's the Stephen Grant equivalent of Moon Knight. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So what they seem to be doing with the whole personas is there seems to only really be two personalities inside Mark Spector's body, obviously Mark and Stephen, and then they seem to have their own version of Moon Knight. Obviously, the Moon Knight that we all know is the Mark Spector version, but he's still in control from what I can gather. He's still in control. And then with Stephen, when he summons the suit, he's Mr. Knight, who's a suave, cool-looking Englishman who clearly doesn't know how to fight, but still has the powers of Moon Knight, but he's a little bit different. And obviously, so we'll start. Before we get into that, we'll start from the beginning. Obviously, they left the last episode a bit of a bombshell, and then instantly they went, "Well, actually, that didn't happen," and it was all in Stephen's head, and no one actually saw it, which was an interesting way to take it straight off the bat. Kind of instantly going, "Stephen's crazy," and everyone thinks he's crazy. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, it's like we discussed. They really kind of mess around with the plot, don't they? They make you think one thing and then change it up later on. Because yeah, it kind of makes you believe that Stephen's the one that's crazy. Obviously, then he gets sacked for like vandalizing the toilet, which seems crazy to me. That because obviously nobody would believe that Stephen Grant could be able to pull off that mess. But yeah, on the tape, seeing that the creatures aren't actually there, it's kind of a you almost do a double take because you are confused as to what happened, especially when you've got. If you're not familiar with the comics anyway, especially if you're seeing that he doesn't even believe it's real himself. He's like, this only happens when he's sleeping. And so, yeah, it does play with your mind a little bit. But then when you see the scarab in the gym bag and you see Khonshu there and you can see him speaking to Mark again, it kind of just like reaffirms that it is real. And then I think later on in the fight, it absolutely says for certain, yeah, this is happening when Moon Knight's being like punched all the way across buildings and stuff. Sorry, Mr. Knight rather. And you're just like, okay, yeah, this is happening. This is real. It's interesting though. I don't know what your thoughts on it though. Why do you think that normal people can't see the creatures?
It's probably a mystical thing, and you have to be maybe, let's say, an avatar of one of the gods to be able to see it. It's probably just. I think it's just. They won't explain necessarily why. I'm not sure they will, but it'll be just kind of an interesting plot point in terms of storytelling to make it seem like obviously it's fake. It's all in his head, and then actually it's just other people can't see it, which would it's just it kind of explains it in a way that they can still make a very interesting story out of it without having to explain why other people can't see it. It would just be like, oh, because he's an avatar of Khonshu. He can see it, whereas other people can't. Obviously, the Jekyll seems to come from Ahmet's power from the staff that she gave to her first avatar, which I'm interested to see if they do tell us who it was. I've seen a few theories that it might be what's his name, Kang, which is an interesting theory. Yeah, I've seen a few where maybe Kang is either Ahmet or the first avatar of Ahmet, because obviously him as the he who remains could see the past, present, and future of everything, and obviously Ahmet seems to have the same power. And obviously, like with Sylvie as a child, she would have been what's the word? She would have been
innocent until proven guilty.
Would have been pruned, even though she was just a child and actually hadn't done anything yet. Which again, with what they said even in this, which Stephen talks about, is obviously Harrow wants to resurrect Ahmet to get rid of all evil, no matter who it is. And then obviously Stephen brings up the point that, well, what about a kid who isn't going to do anything wrong for 30 years, but you're still just going to kill him anyway? And that's kind of the same. It's the same thought-provoking thing that was kind of happening in Loki with the whole pruning system. Was just because someone says that this is the wrong thing to do doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And doing it to a child, obviously, killing a child is obviously killing anyone's awful, but killing a child before they can even grow up is even worse. But yeah, I don't know if you'd heard of that theory.
I hadn't. It's fascinating actually, because you make good points. I'm just very cautious of wandering into sort of Mephisto WandaVision territory, where everybody thought that Mephisto was going to show up. He didn't. Everybody thought then that Magneto was going to show up. He didn't. So I'm very, very cautious of diving into, Kang's gonna be the first avatar of Amit. But yeah, what you're saying is very interesting as well and insightful, because there is kind of that moral dilemma going on between it's like a parallel between Khonshu and Amit, in terms of Khonshu will enact vengeance when a crime has been committed, and Amit will pre-strike so that the sort of event, the crime is never committed. It's very interesting. When I was watching it, it really did bring me back to can't remember the name of the film, but it's a Tom Cruise film, sorry, and it's fantastic. But anyway, I can't remember the name of the film. And it is very interesting, because you sort of get the two polar opposite points of view, and I think that's going to drive the plot forward in terms of Khonshu and Amit obviously coming to head at the end, and then I imagine we'll get maybe an upgraded version of Arthur Harrow in some form of suit, so that he'll be able to sort of battle Moon Knight.
No, yeah, I do agree with that. And obviously, in this episode, the Scarab does get picked up by Harrow, which apparently will lead him to Ahmet's tomb to resurrect her, which obviously you said is to maybe give him a bit more power. I've actually, my train of thought's completely gone. I have no idea why.
I imagine that they'll try and resurrect Ahmet. We'll get to see Ahmet as like the crocodile-headed figure, and there'll be some sort of conflict with Khonshu in that sense. Yeah.
Well, also, obviously, it seems to be that both Khonshu and Ahmet were thrown out by the other gods, in terms of they were exiled, both of them. Does that mean? Do you think that maybe this is why they can have avatars? Possibly, is because they aren't in the same laws as the other gods, because obviously they've been exiled. Obviously, killing gods is very difficult. We know it's possible with the Asgardians and all that. But it does almost seem like they're a different being altogether to Asgardians, in terms of, well, they look completely different. Obviously, Khonshu's a floating skeleton head, which is an interesting take. And all the other gods, like the Celestials that we've seen, seem to be quite organic and real, whereas Khonshu seems very much already dead, but not dead, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's like Arthur Harrow mentioned, the most that Khonshu can really do is whip up a bit of a storm on the like he can't really make any real change, and that's why he has his avatar. As we mentioned last week, in terms of how they will explain sort of the origins of the gods, because unless they just flat out say, yes, these are just Egyptian gods, which wouldn't be very Marvel in line with having done the Norse gods, and they will go into the Greek gods, you'd imagine, at some point. So it will be interesting to see why they can't actually have a physical presence on Earth. And that's why they have their avatars. Maybe, as you mentioned, that's something to do with the fact that they've both sort of been exiled, and as a result, they now have no sort of physical presence. Or maybe it's something to do with just their species as a whole, and that they just can't have that sort of, as I say, physical presence on Earth.
That is very true. And obviously, the big talking point as well was the fact that Harrow was a previous avatar of Khonshu, and obviously that brings up a lot of questions of how did he get out of that situation. He seems to know an awful lot about Khonshu. Is he lying? He could be lying altogether to Stephen to try and get. Obviously, he was clearly trying to sweet talk Stephen into helping him out. Obviously, that didn't go to plan, but then he still got the scarab anyway. That's an interesting way to take Harrow's character, is that he's already been an avatar. Obviously, they have touched on the fact that Khonshu will say, like, oh, this is your last mission, and then I'll let you go. Because obviously he's then, with Layla, said, I want to take up her, which I think will be the way that Khonshu keeps Mark, will be, if I stay with you, I won't take Layla. I think that's probably the route they're going with that anyway. Because obviously they want to keep him as the Moon Knight probably moving forwards. How do you think Harrow got out of that situation? Because it doesn't seem like it's an easy route.
No, you're spot on. And I think your point about potentially Harrow even lying to manipulate Stephen, it could be the case, but I think we need to treat it as though he was being serious, like you say. And for him to have been the Moon Knight before suggests that not only has there just been like 2 Moon Knights, there could have been a long line of Moon Knights, like going back a very long time. Obviously, Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke, is like a little bit older in this. Like they make him out, give him the long sort of grey hair, and they make him out to be a little bit older. So it's assumed that he's been around a while, and therefore he'll have been Moon Knight for a while as well. But it's interesting because he obviously died, because Mark Spector died to be chosen as Moon Knight, as Khonshu's avatar. So that would imply that Arthur Harrow died as well. I don't know. Therefore, I don't know then how he will have got out of serving Khonshu. Maybe even they could take it the route of he betrayed Khonshu, or he started acting in a way that Khonshu wasn't happy with, in terms of not only enacting justice upon guilty people, but enacting justice upon like innocent people as well. And so Khonshu had had enough, got rid of Harrow from his own, like that was Khonshu's doing, and then Harrow found Amit, or rather Amit found Harrow, because of the way that Harrow already was. I wonder if they could take it down that route.
Yeah, and with the way that they seem to pick, or Khonshu seems to pick his avatars, is they've got to be very strong-willed, is what Harrow said. But then also Harrow does say, did he pick you because your mind was easy to break, or because your mind was already broken? Which is an interesting kind of, they're almost polar opposites of each other, those two statements. It's either you're really strong-willed and which I think is to do with the law enforcement. You know, you've got to have a strong moral compass. You know, if you do something wrong, you deserve to be punished. But then you've also got to be easily manipulated by Khonshu. And obviously, again, we don't know for sure if Harrow's telling the truth, but as you said, you kind of have to take it for now as truth, because there's no real reason for him to lie, unless it was to try and put Stephen on his side for that period of time. I'll touch on Layla as well. We obviously didn't touch on her last time because we saw the phone call. Obviously, we didn't speak about, but I'd already said at the start before the podcast, I think it's Marlene Alroni. Alran. I don't know how to say her last name. I'm very sorry. But she is obviously Mark's wife in the comics. They seem to be going down that route a bit. They do have a kid eventually. I think it's with, they have she has a kid with the third personality, I believe, which I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But yeah, she's obviously a mercenary as well, like him, and he seems to be protecting her, wanting a divorce. Do you think there could be more to it than that, or it's genuinely just he's trying to protect her as much as possible?
I think it is that he's trying to protect her as much as possible. I think you touched on it there. She in the comics she had a kid with one of the other personalities. It's interesting as well because there's definitely a case to be made for her and Stephen Grant having a lot in common and obviously getting along well. So there's definitely potential for her to sort of be in love with all of the different sides of Mark Spector and all his personalities. I think with the kid stuff, they would touch on that a long way down the line. I don't think they'd necessarily address that here. But yeah, it's interesting as well. This might be a completely wild theory, but obviously we don't know if Stephen Grant's been there the entire life. Like we don't know if he was born of the product of Mark dying and going through that traumatic experience, and Stephen Grant is his way of dealing with the nerves and stuff like that. And so even because obviously he knows French, Layla knows French. Bear with me here because this is a wild theory, but he's learning hieroglyphics. Layla can read hieroglyphics. What if Stephen Grant was based on certain aspects of Layla in order for him to see the good stuff in her and then sort of portray that into himself, be the version of himself that wants to be more compatible with Layla? Just a wild, crazy theory there, because obviously we don't know if Stephen's been there like the entire life. We don't know if Stephen's been there just since the first episode. Like we can assume he's been there a while because he's like been working at a gift shop and stuff, but we don't actually, we don't know how long Stephen's been around. So it's definitely an interesting avenue that I think they'll explore.
And on that as well, they seem to Mark seems to be quite protective of Stephen as well. He seems to be very protective of him, and obviously it could have been. I'm sure Conchu probably could just get rid of Stephen, but Mark seems to be very adamant on he won't be an issue. Let him be. It's okay. Obviously, Conchu at the end does touch on the fact that in their agreement, Mark and Conchu's agreement, that Mark said Stephen wouldn't be an issue, which obviously does make you think: was it a fresh thing, or did it happen again? Like it means that there's so many different points now. Like Stephen could have been created. Could he have been there from birth, just in the mirror, so to speak, as always? And that's why. But the only reason he really ever came out was because of it. Like Conchu got this power into him, and he died, which is a big thing. So yeah, I like the idea that Stephen's Mark's best self for Layla. I do like that idea. And it does make a lot of sense with him speaking French and all that, when clearly he didn't used to be able to do that. Mark clearly, obviously, didn't used to be able to do that because Layla was very surprised by it. But do you think she was part of the mercenaries that obviously Mark fell out with? Or do you think she was separate as well?
I'm going to assume she was separate based on the fact that they are still, obviously, they clearly like each other and they haven't betrayed each other and fallen out, that sort of thing. So I'm going to assume that was separate. I wonder if maybe the mercenaries, they were part of the same group, but then the mercenaries turned on Mark, but sort of like let Layla go. And that was how it played out. It is really just speculation at this point. I don't think we've seen enough of Layla and Mark's relationship yet, because obviously we've just seen sort of the rapport between Layla and Stephen. We haven't really seen Layla and Mark yet, so it'll be interesting to see how they explore that in the next couple of episodes, in terms of like sort of their origins and whether she was part of that group or not. But yeah, like I think one of the standouts for this episode that has to be mentioned is the action. I thought the action was absolutely fantastic, and not even just in terms of seeing Moon Knight, but when you've got Mr. Knight and Layla fighting off the jackal, as you mentioned, the Egyptian jackal, when they've got them like fighting and he's invisible, and then we're seeing it from the invisible point of view,
I like
where
that. Yeah.
Mr. Knight is sort of being like dragged in the air and like flung about by just absolutely nothing at all. And you see the reaction of like the London civilians and stuff like that. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. I thought it was genius to sort of portray it like that. Obviously, that could have been done in a very slapstick way, played off for jokes, and to an extent, it was seeing like the London civilians' point of view. But for the most part, I thought they did a really good job with it. And yeah, I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, no, I'd say visually they did very much step it up this episode with the mirrors. The fight scenes were very interesting. Obviously, there's the jackal when it came out the ground was obviously a very CGI heavy, but quite visually appealing. He almost seemed to come from the underworld, in a sense, which obviously is interesting because Ahmet was part of that underworld experience in a sense when. I'm not going to get into that. I need to do some more research into that bit. But yeah, she was obviously part of when you die, you did come into contact with her in some way or another. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, visually, I did think they very much stepped up. I liked how they used Conchu. Obviously, you got much, much better looks at him, and he does look incredible. They have done a phenomenal job on his how he looks, because he could have looked awful, and they have smashed that. But I think we've covered everything in a quick 22-minute video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Me and Tom certainly enjoyed this one, and the episode was very good. And I'm sure me and Tom are also looking forward to next Wednesday as well, where we may also have a guest for you, which you have to look forward to. But yeah, if you enjoyed it, please do leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here. That'd be a massive help for us. It does help us out a lot. Check out all our socials. All of our links are down below. And me and Tom will certainly be seeing you next Wednesday for another Gradient show. Cheers.